My name's David. I'm the kind of guy who believes in the value of hard work and loyalty. I wasn't born into wealth, so I had to hustle my way through life. Years of grinding, long hours at the office, and dealing with corporate nonsense finally paid off. I work in finance, stocks and investments mostly, and while it may sound glamorous, it's really just numbers, spreadsheets, and endless meetings. That's where I first met her, my wife, Rachel. Rachel was this stunning brunette with an aura of confidence and sophistication. When we met, she was working as a marketing consultant. To be honest, she was way out of my league. Rachel had this incredible ability to command a room, and she knew it. I was just the guy crunching numbers in the background. But somehow, we hit it off, and within a couple of years, we were married. Now, our relationship wasn't perfect, far from it. At first, things were great. Weekend getaways, fancy dinners, and endless conversations about our future. But as time went on, something shifted. It started small. Rachel began staying out late more often, claiming she had client dinners or networking events. At first, I didn't think much of it. She had always been ambitious and networking was part of her job. But then, the late nights became more frequent, and so did the excuses. There were other signs, too. Her phone never left her hand, and she guarded it like Fort Knox. She'd always been active on social media, but suddenly, I wasn't seeing her updates anymore. It was as if I had been blocked from certain parts of her life. We stopped having the deep, meaningful conversations we once did. Now, our talks were surface level, mostly about work or what to have for dinner. Rachel's behavior wasn't the only thing that changed. I started noticing small details, things I had overlooked before. The perfume she wore was different, more seductive, more potent. Her wardrobe shifted too. She traded her usual business casual outfits for skimpier dresses and high heels, even on days when she didn't have any work meetings. She'd disappear for hours on weekends, always with the same vague explanation: just running errands. Then, there was the night I found an unfamiliar cologne scent lingering on her clothes. I asked her about it, trying to sound casual, but she shrugged it off with a laugh, saying it was from some guy at work who gave her a hug at a meeting. I didn't push it. After all, I had no concrete reason to believe anything was going on. But deep down, a seed of doubt had already taken root. I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, that I was reading too much into things, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Every time she looked at her phone and smiled, I couldn't help but wonder who she was texting. Every time she got dressed up to go out, I questioned if she was really meeting clients or someone else. Yet, I kept those thoughts buried, not wanting to confront the possibility that the woman I had pledged my life to could be betraying me. Our marriage was holding together by a thread. It wasn't like we fought all the time. In fact, that might have been better. No, our problem was silence. We barely talked anymore, except for the basic pleasantries required to keep the household running. But even in those rare moments when we did communicate, it felt forced, as if we were going through the motions of a marriage that had already died. But neither of us was ready to admit it, and that's when he entered the picture. It started with subtle hints. Rachel would mention a colleague from work, this guy named Brad. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, we both had colleagues we spoke about from time to time. But it wasn't long before I noticed that Brad's name started popping up more and more in our conversations. Every story, every anecdote. Somehow, he was always there. She spoke about him with a certain light in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. Then there were the trips. Rachel began traveling more often for work conferences. She'd be gone for days at a time, leaving me to manage everything at home. And every time she returned, she seemed distant, almost as if a part of her had stayed behind. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that I was being insecure, maybe even jealous. But the distance between us was growing. The signs were too many to ignore, and yet I did. At least for a while. Because you see, I still loved her. Despite everything, despite the doubts, the suspicion, I held on to this naive hope that things would get better. That the woman I fell in love with was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the layers of secrecy and lies. But as much as I tried to keep my head buried in the sand, reality had a way of creeping up on me, and it was about to hit me like a freight train. Rachel and I lived in a comfortable middle-class home, not too extravagant, but enough to show we had worked hard to build a decent life together. We both had solid careers, enough to keep up with the demands of the modern world. But no matter how much we built up our material life, it couldn't fill the growing emotional void between us. It was around this time that I started to notice things, not just the late nights or the trips out of town that had become routine at this point. No, it was the small stuff. The way she looked at me had changed. It wasn't hate or even frustration. It was indifference, like I had become part of the furniture in her life. The way she used to smile when she saw me, the way her eyes lit up when we laughed together, it was gone, replaced by a cold distance I couldn't bridge no matter how hard I tried. I wasn't naive. I'd seen friends go through it, heard the stories, even joked about it over beers with the guys. I knew what infidelity looked like from the outside, but knowing and accepting are two different things. When it's your own wife, your own home at stake, you'll do anything to avoid that ugly truth staring you in the face. Still, the signs kept piling up. I noticed how Rachel's work schedule seemed to align perfectly with Brad's, her colleague, the one she couldn't stop mentioning. Brad this, Brad that. It was always him. At first, I didn't think much of it, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. There was something off about the way she talked about him, almost as if she was trying too hard to sound casual. Then, there were the trips. She started traveling more frequently, always for work conferences or client meetings, conveniently the same dates and locations as Brad's. She'd be gone for days, leaving me with the house and the silence that had grown between us. Every time she returned, something felt off. Her affection seemed forced, like she was just going through the motions. I began to piece it together, but I didn't want to confront it. Part of me clung to the hope that I was overthinking, that my suspicions were just paranoia. But there was one night, one specific night, when everything became painfully clear. Rachel had left for another work event, a late dinner with clients, or so she said. I sat alone in the living room, staring at the TV without really watching it. My mind kept replaying the little moments, the way she guarded her phone, the way she had become more secretive with every passing week. That night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I'm not proud of what I did, but desperation has a way of pushing you past your limits. While she was out, I grabbed her laptop and went through her emails. She was careful, too careful. Her texts were always deleted, her call history wiped clean, and there was nothing suspicious in her inbox. But then, I found something buried in her archived messages, a confirmation for a hotel booking in Brad's name, a weekend conference that I knew didn't exist. My stomach dropped. There it was, in black and white. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it, but there was nothing to make sense of. I knew. I had suspected for months, maybe even longer, but now there was no more room for denial. That sinking feeling, the kind where your heart feels like it's been ripped out of your chest, hit me hard. It's the moment when everything you've built, every ounce of trust you had, starts crumbling to dust. She was cheating on me. My wife, the woman I'd vowed to spend my life with, was sleeping with another man. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to do anything that would make the pain go away, but I didn't. Instead, I closed the laptop, took a deep breath, and waited. Because I knew that confrontation wasn't the answer, not yet. I needed more than just suspicion. I needed proof. Rachel came home late that night, like she usually did. The door creaked open, and she stepped in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. I was sitting on the couch, the TV flickering in the background, though I hadn't been watching it for hours. My mind was still processing what I had discovered on her laptop, The confirmation for that hotel booking played on a loop in my head. She walked past me, barely acknowledging my presence, just like she'd been doing for months now. I glanced up at her, searching for any trace of guilt on her face. There was none. Rachel was an expert at hiding her emotions, but I wasn't looking for the obvious signs anymore. I had learned to notice the small things, the way she avoided eye contact, how her hand lingered on her phone as if it was her lifeline to a world I no longer had access to. "How was the dinner?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, neutral. It was a simple question, but my heart was racing. "Fine," she replied, her tone dismissive as she kicked off her heels and headed toward the bedroom. Tiring as usual. That was it. No further details, no small talk, just a quick response to keep the conversation short. She didn't want to engage, didn't want to offer more than what was necessary. She was good at this. Too good. I watched her disappear into the bedroom, knowing full well that she had just spent the evening with Brad, probably planning their next rendezvous, or maybe even laughing at how oblivious her husband was. Except I wasn't oblivious anymore. I knew exactly what was going on. I could have confronted her right there, demanded answers, screamed, raged. But something inside me held back. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed more than just a hotel confirmation. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to make sure that when I confronted her, there would be no room for denial, no way for her to weasel out of the truth. I needed to destroy any chance she had of lying to me. The next morning, I went to work as usual, pretending everything was fine. But instead of diving into my usual tasks, I started putting together a plan. I had a friend, Nick, who worked in private security. I called him up, explained the situation in vague terms, just enough to get him on board without giving away too many details. I asked him to tail Rachel the next time she went on one of her business trips. I wanted photos, timestamps, anything that could confirm my suspicions. Nick didn't ask many questions. He just agreed to help, like any good friend would. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was like a switch had been flipped. The hurt was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Cold, calculated determination. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I was going to expose her for the liar she was, and when I did, she would have no choice but to face the consequences. The days passed slowly. Rachel was still her distant, secretive self, but I didn't push her. I let her believe that I was still in the dark, that I hadn't figured out her betrayal. It wasn't easy, though. Every time I saw her smile, every time she dressed up to go out with clients, my stomach churned with anger and disgust. But I kept it all bottled up. I knew my moment would come soon enough. And then, it did. It was a Friday evening, a week after I had set things in motion with Nick. Rachel told me she was going out of town for the weekend, another work trip, this time in a neighboring city. She packed a small suitcase, kissed me goodbye with the same robotic affection she'd been giving me for months, and left without a second thought. As soon as she walked out the door, I called Nick. He had already been briefed and was ready to follow her. Hours passed, and I didn't hear anything. I sat in the dark, my phone in my hand, waiting for the inevitable. Finally, around midnight, my phone buzzed. Nick had sent me a photo. It was Rachel, dressed in a tight black dress, walking into a hotel. Brad was right behind her, his hand casually resting on her lower back. My chest tightened as I stared at the image, feeling my worst fears confirmed in the most visceral way possible. This was no business trip. This was exactly what I thought it was. Then came the next message. Nick had captured them entering a hotel room together. No more speculation, no more doubt. This was it. The ugly truth laid bare. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, my thoughts racing. It felt like I had been punched in the gut, but at the same time, there was this twisted sense of relief. I had been right. I wasn't crazy. She had been lying to me all along. But what came next? I wasn't sure. The anger was bubbling up inside me, but I didn't want to act on it impulsively. I needed to think, to figure out my next move. One thing was clear, though. I wasn't going to confront her tonight. No, I was going to let her enjoy her weekend with Brad. Let her think she had gotten away with it. And when she came back, I would be ready. The evidence was in my hands now, and Rachel had no idea the storm that was coming her way. Rachel came back on Sunday night, right on schedule. She walked into the house like everything was normal, wearing that same tight black dress she had worn in the photos Nick had sent me. It was almost surreal, watching her unpack her things, smiling at me like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I knew now. I had the proof. I played along as I had been doing for weeks. I asked her about her trip, how the conference had gone. She gave me the same vague answers she always did. It was fine. A bit tiring. Lots of meetings. Her words felt hollow, rehearsed. It made me sick to hear her lie so effortlessly. But I kept my poker face on. No outbursts, no accusations. I couldn't afford to let her know I was on to her, not yet. I knew she would eventually slip up, that the lies would unravel on their own. All I had to do was wait, let her dig herself deeper. Every smile she flashed, every laugh she faked, it was another shovel of dirt in the grave she was digging for herself. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying the images Nick had sent me, those photos of Rachel and Brad, their bodies close, disappearing into that hotel room. The visual burned into my memory, searing through whatever remnants of trust I had left. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life with, had become a stranger to me. Worse, she had become my enemy. The next morning, I woke up early, leaving Rachel asleep in bed. I needed to get out of the house, away from the charade. I drove to a nearby cafe, ordered a black coffee, and sat by the window, staring out at the street but seeing nothing. My mind was elsewhere, working through my next steps. I had the evidence, photos, timestamps, everything. But what now? What was the endgame? Divorce was inevitable, but it couldn't just be that simple. Rachel had humiliated me, betrayed me in the worst way possible. I wasn't just going to walk away quietly while she pranced off with Brad. No, I wanted her to feel the same kind of pain she'd inflicted on me. I wanted her to pay for what she'd done. I took a sip of coffee, staring at the swirling liquid as if it held the answers. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Nick. "You ready to talk?" he asked when I picked up. "Yeah," I replied. "We need to figure out what happens next." Nick had done his job perfectly. He had followed Rachel through every step of her weekend getaway, tracking her movements, documenting everything. There was no doubt now. She had been cheating on me for months. The photos were undeniable proof. "We have everything," Nick continued. "Photos, videos, time-stamped evidence. It's airtight, David. She won't be able to deny it." Airtight. I liked the sound of that. But it wasn't just about proving her infidelity. I needed to protect myself financially. Rachel and I had shared everything, our home, our investments, everything we had worked for together. I couldn't let her walk away with half of what I'd earned, not after what she'd done. She didn't deserve it. "I'm thinking of confronting her," I said, my voice steady, but the anger simmering underneath. "Be careful, man," Nick warned. "You don't want to rush into this. You have the upper hand now. Don't blow it by losing control. She'll try to twist things, make you out to be the bad guy." He was right. As much as I wanted to blow up, to shout, to throw everything in her face, I needed to play it smart. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about making sure Rachel couldn't weasel her way out of the mess she had created. I needed to handle this with strategy, just like I would handle a high-stakes investment. Calculate every move, anticipate every outcome. I spent the next few days collecting myself, preparing for the confrontation. Rachel, oblivious as ever, carried on with her life like everything was fine. She still went to her meetings, still texted on her phone late into the night, thinking I didn't notice. But I noticed everything now. Every move she made, every lie she told, it only fueled my resolve. I started quietly moving money around, closing joint accounts, transferring assets into my name. I didn't tell Rachel. I wanted to make sure that when everything blew up, she wouldn't have a leg to stand on. I met with a lawyer, explaining the situation. He assured me that with the evidence I had, the divorce would swing heavily in my favor. "We'll make sure she walks away with as little as possible," the lawyer said, his tone professional, yet cold. That's what I wanted. Rachel had already taken everything from me emotionally. She wasn't going to take anything from me financially, not if I had anything to say about it. A week later, I decided it was time. I had prepared myself mentally, emotionally. The paperwork was ready, the assets were secured, and I had my plan in place. All that was left was to confront Rachel, to finally break the facade she had been living behind for months. It was a Friday night, the same night she was supposed to be going out with Brad again. She had told me earlier in the day that she was meeting clients, and that she wouldn't be home until late. But I had other plans, plans she wasn't expecting. I came home from work early, making sure I was there when Rachel walked through the door. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 100 times. What I would say, how I would reveal the evidence. I wanted to see her face when she realized I knew, when the lies finally caught up to her. When Rachel walked in that night, she was dressed to kill. A tight red dress, high heels, her hair done up. She looked stunning, but all I could see was the betrayal. All I could think about was how she had worn that dress for another man, how she had been pretending this whole time. She didn't notice me right away, busy rummaging through her purse, probably checking her phone for Brad's messages. "Going somewhere?" I asked, my voice calm, but cold. Rachel froze, her hand still in her purse. She looked up at me, surprised, as if she hadn't expected me to be there. Rachel slowly turned to face me, her expression a mixture of surprise and confusion. It was clear she hadn't expected to see me standing there, waiting for her. For a moment, we just stared at each other. The silence stretched out, thick with tension. I could feel the anger boiling under my skin, but I kept it in check. This wasn't the time to lose control. Not yet. "David, what are you doing home?" she asked, her voice a bit too casual, too forced. She quickly slipped her phone into her purse, the way someone does when they've got something to hide. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, taking a step closer. "You're all dressed up for a client meeting, right?" Rachel blinked, her face momentarily blank before the mask of indifference slipped back into place. "Yeah, I told you earlier. I have a late dinner with clients from out of town." Her lie felt like acid in my ears, knowing full well she had planned to meet Brad tonight. I had the proof in my phone, photos, timestamps, undeniable evidence of her betrayal. But instead of confronting her with it immediately, I decided to push her further, let her dig herself deeper into the hole she didn't even know she was standing in. "Oh, right. Must be an important client," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You seem to have a lot of those lately." Rachel's eyes narrowed, sensing the edge in my tone. She shifted uncomfortably, her fingers brushing against the strap of her purse. "You know how it is, David. Work's been hectic. We can't all clock out at 5 and call it a day." Her words were sharp, defensive, but she didn't know she was only making things worse. I was done playing nice. I walked over to the coffee table, where I'd left a stack of papers earlier that day. They were copies of the evidence Nick had gathered, hotel confirmations, photos of her and Brad, emails that I had printed out after finding them in her archived messages. I had arranged everything neatly, making sure there was no escaping the truth. "Rachel," I said, picking up the papers, "let's cut the bullshit." Her face paled as I tossed the papers onto the table in front of her. She glanced down, her eyes widening as she took in the damning evidence. For a second, she was frozen, like a deer caught in headlights. Then, Her gaze snapped back to mine, a mix of fear and anger flashing in her eyes. "What? What the hell is this?" she stammered, her voice shaking. "This?" I said, my voice cold and steady. "This is the truth. These are the hotel bookings under Brad's name. These are the photos of you two together. And these," I pointed to the emails, "are the lies you've been feeding me for months." Rachel took a step back, her hands trembling as she picked up one of the photos. It was a picture of her and Brad entering the hotel, his hand on her lower back, their bodies pressed close. There was no way to explain this away, no excuse that would erase the betrayal staring her in the face. "I can explain," she started, her voice weak, but I cut her off. "Explain?" I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and raw in the quiet room. "Explain what, Rachel? How you've been screwing Brad behind my back? How you've been lying to my face, pretending everything's fine while you sneak off to hotel rooms with him?" Her face twisted with desperation, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She was searching for words, for something, anything that could fix the mess she had created. But there was nothing left for her to say. The truth was out, and she couldn't run from it. It wasn't what it looks like," she said, her voice barely a whisper now. "Don't insult me, Rachel," I spat. "I'm not an idiot. I've been watching, waiting, giving you the benefit of the doubt for months. I hoped I was wrong. But now I have proof, and you have nothing." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel sympathy. Not anymore. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she had been caught. "David, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I shook my head, the anger rising again, hotter this time. "Didn't mean for it to happen? You've been having an affair for months. You lied to me every single day. And now you want to stand there and say it wasn't what you meant?" Rachel stepped forward, reaching out as if to touch me, but I took a step back, holding up my hand. Don't even try to touch me." She froze, her hand hanging in the air between us, her tears now flowing freely. I could see the regret on her face, but it wasn't the kind of regret that comes from realizing you've hurt someone you love. No, this was the regret of someone who had lost control of a game they thought they were winning. "David, please, just listen." She started again, but I wasn't in the mood for her excuses. "I don't want to hear it," I said, my voice like ice. "You think I haven't seen the way you've been acting? The lies, the sneaking around, the excuses? I've been watching you, Rachel. I know everything." She sobbed, wiping at her face with the back of her hand, mascara smudging under her eyes. She was breaking down now, but it didn't matter to me. Her tears were meaningless. She had made her choice the moment she stepped into that hotel room with Brad. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said, my voice steady. "The divorce papers are ready. I've made sure you'll get as little as possible. You're not walking away with half of what I've worked for." Rachel's face crumpled, her hands trembling as she dropped the photo she had been holding. "David, no. Please. We can fix this. I'll end it with Brad. I'll do anything, just—" "Fix it?" I interrupted, incredulous. "There's nothing left to fix, Rachel. You killed this marriage the second you decided to cheat. I've been a fool, but I'm not going to let you make a fool of me any longer." She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. But I felt nothing. No pity, no remorse. I had already mourned the loss of my marriage. Now all I felt was relief that the lies were finally over. I stood there for a moment, watching her crumble under the weight of her own decisions. I had imagined this moment for weeks, how it would feel to finally confront her, to see the truth laid bare. And now that it was here, I felt an eerie sense of calm. "I'll give you a week," I said coldly. "Pack your things and get out. We'll handle the paperwork after that." Rachel looked up at me, her face wet with tears, her lips trembling as she tried to form words, but I didn't wait to hear them. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing behind me. This was the end. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The confrontation had happened just as I had planned, and I had no doubt that Rachel was fully aware now. There was no turning back. The life she thought she could control was slipping away, and I had made sure of it. But I wasn't done yet. The storm hadn't passed. It was only beginning. There was still Brad to deal with, and he had no idea what was coming his way. The house was suffocating after the confrontation. Rachel was still upstairs, sobbing, but her cries barely registered anymore. The cold anger inside me hadn't dulled. It was just focused now. It wasn't enough to just expose Rachel's betrayal. I needed to deal with Brad, too, the man who had slithered his way into my life and ruined everything. I knew exactly what I had to do next. Confronting Rachel had been the first step. But Brad? He was the real target now. I wanted to make sure he felt every bit of the fallout from his affair with my wife. He wasn't walking away from this unscathed. I left the house without a word, grabbing my keys and slamming the door behind me. I had no plan, no script for what would happen next, but I didn't care. All I knew was that I needed to see him, to face him, and make him understand exactly what he had done. As I drove through the dark streets, my mind was racing. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I had no idea what I'd say to him, but I was beyond words at this point. I didn't care if this ended with fists flying. In fact, part of me hoped it would. I knew where he lived. Rachel had mentioned it a few times during her innocent stories about her colleague Brad. He had a loft downtown in one of those modern high-rise buildings with floor-to-ceiling windows. Flashy, expensive. It suited him perfectly. I parked a block away from his building, trying to calm myself as I made my way to the entrance. The doorman eyed me suspiciously when I walked in, but I gave him a cold smile and waved him off like I had every right to be there. Brad lived on the 8th floor. My pulse quickened as the elevator rose, the tension building with every second. By the time I reached his door, I was brimming with rage. I didn't bother knocking. I pounded my fist against the door, hard, the sound echoing down the hall. It took a moment, but then the door swung open, and there he was, Brad, the man who had been sleeping with my wife, standing there like he didn't have a care in the world. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair slicked back in that cocky, self-assured way. He looked like he was expecting someone else, but when he saw me, his confident grin faltered. "David," Brad said, his voice uncertain. He was clearly caught off guard. I pushed past him into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. I didn't care about politeness anymore. I was done with games. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low, barely contained. Brad stood there, stunned for a moment, then closed the door behind him. He didn't say anything, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He knew why I was here. "I know about you and Rachel," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I know everything." Brad's face tightened, but to his credit, he didn't try to deny it. He just sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as if this was some kind of inconvenience for him. That smug look on his face only fueled my rage. "Look, David, it's complicated," he began, his tone far too calm for the situation. "I didn't mean for things to get out of hand like this." "Didn't mean for things to get out of hand?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been screwing my wife for months, and you think this is just something that got out of hand?" Brad held up his hands, as if trying to defuse the situation. "I'm not here to make excuses. What happened between me and Rachel? It wasn't supposed to be serious." I stepped closer, my fists clenched at my sides. "Serious? You think this is about whether or not it was serious? You ruined my marriage, Brad. You came into my home, into my life, and took everything from me." He flinched at my words, finally realizing the depth of the situation. But then he made the mistake of trying to justify it. Rachel, she wasn't happy, man, he said, his voice almost sympathetic. She told me things between you two had been dead for a long time. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew Rachel and I hadn't been in a good place for a while, but hearing him say it, hearing the justification for their betrayal, made it feel like someone had twisted the knife. That doesn't give you the right to come between us, I growled, taking another step toward him. My blood was boiling, and I was teetering on the edge of losing control. I'm not the enemy here, David, Brad said, his voice softening. I didn't force Rachel into anything. If anything, I didn't let him finish. My fist collided with his jaw before he could spew another word. The impact sent him stumbling back, crashing into the wall behind him. I didn't care anymore. I had warned myself I wouldn't lose control, but now that I was face to face with him, it was impossible to hold back. Brad wiped the blood from his lip, glaring at me. What the hell, man? He spat, his cool demeanor cracking. You think you can stand here and explain away what you did to me? I shouted, advancing on him. You think you're the victim now? He pushed himself off the wall, straightening up, but he didn't fight back. Maybe he was too stunned, or maybe he thought he deserved it. Either way, I didn't care. You took everything from me, I said, my voice shaking with anger, and now you're going to pay for it. I lunged at him again, but this time he was ready. Brad caught my arm, pushing me back, but not before I got another solid punch in. He shoved me hard, and I stumbled, catching myself on the edge of a table. My breathing was ragged, the adrenaline pumping through me. We stood there, both of us panting, the tension between us thick and electric. For a moment, I thought we might go at it again, but then Brad raised his hands, backing off. Look, he said, his voice calmer now. I get it. You want to hurt me. Hell, maybe I deserve it. But what's that going to solve? Rachel's still going to leave you, man. She's not coming back. Those words hit harder than any punch. Rachel was still going to leave me. She wasn't coming back. No matter how much I wanted to tear Brad apart, the truth was, my marriage was over. Nothing I did here would change that. I stood there, breathing heavily, my fists still clenched, but the fight was draining out of me. Brad was right, in his own twisted way. Beating him to a pulp wasn't going to fix anything. Get out of my life, Brad, I finally said, my voice low but firm. I don't ever want to see you again. Brad didn't argue. He just nodded, wiping the blood from his lip again. I get it, he muttered. I turned and walked out of the apartment without another word. The rage was still burning inside me, but it wasn't directed at Brad anymore. It was aimed at the whole situation, at the mess my life had become. As I stepped into the cool night air, I realized the truth of what Brad had said. Rachel was gone, not physically, but emotionally. She had left me long before I found out about the affair. Now it was just a matter of letting go. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. There was still one thing left. Rachel would pay for what she'd done, and I would make sure she felt every ounce of the consequences. This wasn't over. Not yet. I drove back home in a daze, my knuckles still throbbing from the punches I'd thrown. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving me with a strange sense of emptiness. The confrontation with Brad hadn't given me the satisfaction I thought it would. Sure, I had landed a couple of punches, but in the end, nothing had changed. The truth still remained. Rachel was gone, and no amount of violence or anger could change that. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had, quiet, empty, deceivingly normal. But it wasn't normal anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. Sat there for a few minutes, staring at the front door, trying to work up the energy to go inside. Part of me wanted to just keep driving, to leave it all behind and never look back. But that wasn't who I was. I had built this life, and I wasn't going to let it crumble without a fight. When I finally walked inside, the silence hit me like a wall. Rachel was still upstairs, probably crying or packing her things, but I didn't care. I headed straight for the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of whiskey, and poured myself a drink. The amber liquid burned as it went down, but I welcomed the heat. I needed something to dull the edges of my anger, something to keep me from doing something I'd regret. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the glass in my hand. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching my life unravel from the outside. I had always been in control of my work, my finances, my marriage, but now it felt like I was spinning out with nothing to hold on to. Rachel's betrayal had shattered everything I thought I knew. After a while, I heard soft footsteps on the stairs. Rachel appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked fragile, vulnerable, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not anymore. "David," she started, her voice weak, almost pleading. "Can we talk?" I didn't look at her. I just took another sip of whiskey, letting the silence hang between us. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she continued, her voice trembling. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but I—" "Stop," I said, cutting her off, my voice cold and steady. "I don't want to hear it." Rachel flinched at my tone, but she didn't back down. She took a tentative step closer, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the kitchen counter. "David, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to understand." "I don't need to understand anything," I snapped, finally looking up at her. My gaze was sharp, piercing. "You cheated. You lied. You betrayed everything we built together. There's nothing left to talk about." Her eyes welled up with fresh tears, but I didn't care. I was past caring. She could cry all she wanted, but it wouldn't change what she'd done. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry, David." "Sorry?" I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the quiet kitchen. "You're not sorry, Rachel. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry that your perfect little affair with Brad is over, but you're not sorry for what you did to me." She opened her mouth to say something, but the words seemed to die on her lips. She knew I was right. There was no point in trying to defend herself anymore. I stood up, setting my glass down on the table with a heavy thud. "You've got 1 week to get your things and leave," I said, my voice low and firm. "After that, I don't want to see you again. I don't care where you go or what you do. Just be gone." Rachel's face crumpled, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, wiping at her tears with shaky hands. For a moment, I thought she might try to plead with me again, but instead, she turned and disappeared back up the stairs. The sound of her footsteps fading away felt like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. I sat back down, staring at the empty glass in front of me. It was over. The life I had known, the woman I had loved, it was all over. But instead of feeling relief, all I felt was a hollow emptiness. I had wanted this, hadn't I? I had wanted to be rid of Rachel, to make her pay for her betrayal. And now that it was happening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something far greater than just a wife. I finished the rest of the whiskey and poured another. The silence in the house was suffocating, but I didn't have the energy to break it. I sat there for what felt like hours, letting the alcohol numb the pain that had settled deep in my chest. By the time I stood up again, it was dark outside. I went to the window, staring out at the quiet street. The world kept moving, oblivious to the chaos that had erupted inside my life. It felt wrong, like everything should have stopped, like the universe should have acknowledged what had happened. But it didn't. Life went on, whether I liked it or not. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mind kept replaying everything: Rachel's lies, Brad's smug face, the confrontation. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. Every creak of the house, every distant sound from outside, it all reminded me of what I had lost. But in the morning, something shifted. When the first light of dawn crept through the window, I felt a strange clarity. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was tempered now by a cold resolve. I had been through the worst of it. I had confronted Rachel, faced Brad, and now it was time to finish what I had started. I got up, showered, and dressed, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. The divorce papers were ready, the assets secured. I wasn't going to let Rachel take anything from me. She had already taken my heart, my trust, my marriage. But she wasn't going to take my life, not the life I had built. I called my lawyer, arranging to meet later that day. I wanted everything in motion as soon as possible. Rachel had 1 week to pack her things and leave, but I wasn't going to wait that long to start cutting her out of my life. As I drove to the lawyer's office, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm had passed, but the aftermath was still being dealt with. I knew there would be more to face, more emotions, more battles, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control again. And this time, I wasn't going to lose. When I arrived at the office, my lawyer, Jack, greeted me with a firm handshake. He was a no-nonsense type of guy, the kind you wanted in your corner when things got ugly. We sat down in his office, the divorce papers spread out between us. "So," Jack said, flipping through the documents. "You're sure about this?" I nodded. "Yeah, I'm sure." He looked at me for a moment, studying my face before leaning back in his chair. "We'll make sure this goes smoothly, David. You've got the evidence, the financials are in order, and Rachel doesn't have a leg to stand on. She's not going to get much, if anything." "That's what I want," I said, my voice steady. "I don't want her walking away with a dime more than she deserves." Jack nodded, pulling out a pen. "Then let's get started." We spent the next hour going over the details, the division of assets, the house, everything Rachel wouldn't be able to touch. It was clinical, detached, and exactly what I needed. Jack was thorough, making sure every loose end was tied up, every loophole closed. When it was done, I signed the papers, sealing the end of my marriage with the stroke of a pen. It felt final, but not as painful as I thought it would. This was the beginning of the end, and I was ready for it. As I left the office, the sun was shining, the air crisp and clear. It was a new day, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. There were still loose ends to tie up, and one of them was Brad. He had gotten off easy with a few punches and a bloody lip, but he wasn't going to get away with ruining my life. I had one last move to make, and I was going to make damn sure it hit where it hurt the most. I headed back to my car, a plan already forming in my mind. Brad thought he was in the clear, that he could walk away from this mess without consequences. But he was wrong. I wasn't just going to fade into the background while he carried on with his life, thinking he had won. No, this wasn't over yet. It was a Wednesday evening, the kind that passes quietly, without any sense of impending doom. The house was heavy with silence, the kind that had settled in ever since Rachel and I began drifting apart. I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the TV, barely registering the noise. My mind was preoccupied with thoughts of the divorce, what was left to do, how much longer it would take to finally be over. I didn't expect the knock at the door. It was sharp, urgent, cutting through the stillness like a blade. At first, I thought it might be a neighbor or maybe a delivery I'd forgotten about. But when I stood up and walked toward the door, something in the pit of my stomach twisted. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be an ordinary knock. I opened the door, and there he was. Brad, tall, dark-haired, and with the same cocky, arrogant smirk that I'd come to associate with the man who had shattered my life. His presence filled the doorway, and for a moment, I couldn't believe he had the audacity to show up here, at my home, the home Rachel and I had built together, the life he had slithered into and destroyed. He leaned against the doorframe casually, like he had every right to be standing there. His eyes gleamed with an almost predatory confidence, as if he had already claimed his victory and was just here to rub it in. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked, my voice cold and hard as I gripped the door tightly. My knuckles were white, the tension in my body building as I fought the urge to slam the door in his face. Brad chuckled softly, the sound infuriatingly calm. He didn't flinch, didn't back down. Instead, he straightened up and took a step closer, his presence now looming even larger. His eyes flickered with something. Triumph, maybe. And then he spoke, his words laced with smug arrogance. "I'm here for your wife," he said, his voice steady, almost mocking. "Tonight she's coming with me. We're going to spend the whole night together, and there's not a damn thing you can do to stop it." For a moment, I stood there, stunned, his words sinking in like poison. It wasn't just the audacity of him showing up here, it was the sheer boldness of his claim. He wasn't hiding anything anymore. The games, the sneaking around, it was all laid bare now, right in front of me. He wasn't done. He leaned in closer, his eyes never leaving mine as he delivered the final blow, his voice dripping with venom. "I'll satisfy her the way you never could, David. All night long. 12 hours, maybe more. You might want to take a walk or something. This house won't feel like yours anymore by the time we're done." The rage that had been simmering inside me for weeks, months, boiled over. My fists clenched at my sides, the urge to hit him harder than anything I'd ever felt. The sheer audacity, the disgusting grin on his face, the way he stood there as if this was all just a game he had already won. It ignited something in me I couldn't contain. But I didn't explode. Not yet. I swallowed the rage, forcing myself to hold back, because in that moment, I knew something he didn't. "You think you've won, don't you?" I said, my voice low, trembling with barely controlled fury. Brad's smile widened, his eyes glittering with satisfaction. "I already have," he replied, his tone soaked in arrogance. I shook my head, feeling a strange, twisted sense of clarity wash over me. He didn't know. He had no idea what was coming. He thought he was standing there as the victor, claiming his prize, but I was done playing his game. Without another word, I stepped aside, opening the door fully. "Then go ahead," I said, my voice flat, void of emotion. "Go take her." Brad blinked, surprised by my sudden calmness. He hadn't expected me to stand down so easily. But he didn't hesitate. He walked past me, his shoulders squared, his head held high. I watched as he made his way toward the stairs, toward her. As soon as he disappeared, I quietly closed the door behind him, the soft click echoing in the empty hallway. And then I smiled. A cold, bitter smile. Because tonight, Brad and Rachel thought they were winning. But by morning, everything they had built in secret would come crashing down. You see, they didn't know that while they were off enjoying their victory, I had already put my plan in motion. I had been gathering evidence for months, every text, every meeting, every hotel room. I had recordings, photographs, documents, all airtight. My lawyer had everything, and by the time the sun rose, the papers would be filed. Everything Rachel and Brad had thought they were building together would be wiped away in an instant. And not just the divorce, the financials, the career reputations they thought they could protect. They were already in ruins. I had made sure of it. By the time the court was done with her, Rachel wouldn't even have enough to afford a place to stay. Brad? Well, I'd made sure his business would suffer too. Word travels fast when the right people get the right information. A scandal like this, it doesn't just go away. So I sat there, in the quiet of my home, waiting. The rage had cooled, replaced by a cold satisfaction. They thought they were stealing something from me tonight, but in reality, I had already won. As the clock ticked past midnight, I poured myself a drink, settling back into the couch with a strange sense of peace. They could have their night. It would be their last. Because when the morning came, the wreckage they had created would be waiting for them, and I would be free. This was the final blow, and they didn't even see it coming. And just like that, The door to my old life closed, leaving me alone in the silence, victorious in a way they would never understand.